The day the divorce became final, the house didn't change, but I did. The walls were the same color. The furniture sat where it always had, yet everything felt unfamiliar, like I was living inside someone else's life. Silence became the loudest thing I owned. I would wake up reaching for a phone that no longer buzzed, listening for footsteps that never came. I had spent years convincing myself that loneliness inside a marriage was better than loneliness alone. I was wrong. This was heavier. This was quieter. This was honest. That I told people I was fine because that's what you're supposed to say when a long marriage ends. You smile, you nod, you claim freedom. But freedom doesn't feel freeing when it arrives wrapped in fear. Bills piled up faster than I expected. Decisions I once shared now sat entirely on my shoulders. Nights stretched endlessly, and sleep came only after exhaustion won. I replayed conversations, red flags I ignored, apologies I accepted when I shouldn't have. Divorce doesn't just end a relationship. It dismantles the version of you that believed it would last. My son noticed before anyone else. He didn't say much at first. He just showed up more. He fixed the leaky faucet I had been ignoring. He brought groceries without asking. He checked my car, handled paperwork, made sure I was eating. Every small gesture reminded me how far I had fallen. I was supposed to be the one helping him, not the other way around. Each time he asked if I needed anything, a quiet shame settled in my chest. I could see worry in his eyes. The kind children try to hide when they realize their parent isn't as strong as they thought. He told me it was temporary, that I'd find my footing again. I nodded even when I didn't believe it. I hated that my pain had become his concern. I hated that my failure felt like his burden. Still, I let him help because refusing would have meant admitting how broken I really was. The hardest moments came late at night, when the house felt too big and my thoughts grew louder. I would sit alone, scrolling through old photos, wondering when love had turned into routine and routine into resentment. I asked myself if I had stayed too long or left too late. There was no answer, only questions that circled endlessly. I missed being wanted. I missed being seen. Those needs embarrassed me, especially at my age, especially after everything I had already lost. My son kept encouraging me to step back into the world. He said I deserved happiness, that my life wasn't over because my marriage was. His words were kind, innocent, meant to lift me up. But they stirred something I wasn't ready to face. Because beneath the grief and the guilt was a hunger I hadn't acknowledged yet. A desire not just for stability, but for connection. For someone to look at me and see more than a woman who had been left behind. That I told myself I needed time. Time to heal, time to rebuild, time to become whole again. I truly believed I could handle this alone. I believed my worst days were already behind me. What I didn't know then was that healing doesn't always move in a straight line. Sometimes it opens doors you never intended to touch. And sometimes the help meant to save you becomes the first step toward a choice you can never undo. I didn't notice the shift at first. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It crept in quietly, disguised as relief. One less thing to worry about. One less moment spent alone with my thoughts. The person who entered my life did so naturally, without force, without intention, and that's what made it dangerous. They were introduced through a situation my son helped arrange. Nothing personal at first, nothing emotional. Just someone who happened to be there when I needed support. At the beginning, our conversation stayed on the surface. Practical things. Ordinary things. We talked about schedules, responsibilities, small inconveniences that come with starting over. But unlike everyone else, this person didn't rush me. They listened without interrupting. They didn't offer solutions I hadn't asked for. They let me speak until my voice cracked. And when it did, they didn't look away. That alone felt intoxicating. That I told myself it was harmless. People are allowed to talk. People are allowed to connect. After all, I had just been through a divorce. I deserved kindness. That's what I kept repeating whenever the conversation stretched longer than they needed to. Whenever I found myself thinking about the next time we'd talk. Whenever I noticed I was choosing my words more carefully, hoping to sound lighter than I felt. Slowly, the topics changed. We stopped talking only about what needed to be done and started talking about what hurt. I shared pieces of my marriage I had never said out loud before. The disappointments. The silence. The feeling of being invisible while standing next to someone for years. Each confession was met with understanding, not judgment. With empathy, not advice. That response fed something inside me I hadn't realized was starving. I began to look forward to those moments. Not because of anything explicit, but because of how I felt afterward. Less alone. Less broken. More like a woman than a problem to be solved. I caught myself smiling at messages before I even opened them. I told myself it was just gratitude. Just appreciation. Just human connection. But deep down, I knew I was crossing into territory I hadn't planned to enter. The guilt came quietly too. It showed up in small ways. I stopped mentioning these conversations to my son, not because there was anything to hide, I told myself, but because he didn't need to worry. I changed the subject when he asked how things were going. I reassured him I was fine, even when my thoughts were tangled with anticipation and confusion. With every omission, the distance between who I was and who I pretended to be grew wider. There was no touch, no confession, no moment that clearly marked the line being crossed. That's what made it so easy to justify. Emotional closeness doesn't leave visible evidence. It doesn't feel like betrayal at first. It feels like survival, like grabbing onto warmth after being cold for too long. I convinced myself that as long as nothing physical happened, I was still in control. But control is an illusion when loneliness meets attention. I started to notice the way their words lingered with me. How a simple compliment replayed in my head long after it was said. How I dressed differently without meaning to. How my heart reacted before my mind could intervene. These weren't accidents anymore. They were signals I chose to ignore. I knew something was changing, and instead of stepping back, I leaned in. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because for the first time since my divorce, I felt desired without being demanded. Seen without being owned. And that feeling made me forget the promise I had made to myself. That I would never let my pain turn me into someone I wouldn't recognize. The moment everything shifted wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't arrive with accusations or tears. It came quietly, in a conversation that wasn't meant to reveal anything but ended up confirming everything. We were sitting together, the three of us, and the air felt heavier than usual. There was an ease between them that no longer bothered to hide. They spoke openly, confidently, as if they had already rehearsed what this new dynamic would feel like. That was when I realized they weren't afraid of losing me. They were counting on me understanding. My husband spoke about honesty, about how people change, about how relationships aren't meant to stay the same forever. He didn't say her name in the way you would expect, but he didn't have to. Every word leaned in her direction. She watched me carefully, not with guilt, but with anticipation. She wanted to know how I would respond. Would I break? Would I fight? Would I beg? I gave them none of that. I listened. I let them speak without interruption. Inside, something strange happened. The hurt was there, undeniable, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, there was a sense of relief I hadn't anticipated. Hearing them articulate what I had already felt lifted a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't asking for too much. I had simply been holding on to something that had already let go of me. They expected anger. They expected resistance. What unsettled them was my calm. I told them I had known for a while. Not the details, not the conversations, but the truth of it. I explained that distance doesn't appear overnight, and intention doesn't grow without permission. I didn't accuse. I didn't insult. I spoke plainly, honestly, and without apology. That honesty shifted the balance. For the first time, they weren't in control of the situation anymore. She tried to soften it, to explain that nothing was meant to hurt me, that feelings just developed. I stopped her gently. Feelings don't plan, I said, but actions do. Silence followed. In that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. Not over them, but over myself. I wasn't there to negotiate my worth or compete for attention that had already been redirected. What surprised them most was when I admitted I was glad it happened. Not because betrayal is painless, but because living in uncertainty had been worse. Their plan forced clarity where comfort had kept me stagnant. I told them that love shouldn't require me to shrink, to question my intuition, or to accept half-truths just to keep the peace. If this was the path they had chosen, then I would choose mine without regret. The conversation ended without resolution, but I didn't need one. I had already resolved what mattered. That night, I packed a small bag, not in anger but in certainty. There were no slammed doors, no dramatic exits. Just a quiet decision made with a steady heart. I walked away from a life that no longer fit, not because I was pushed out, but because I finally allowed myself to leave. Later, alone with my thoughts, the sadness came in waves. I let it. Healing doesn't come from pretending you're unaffected, but beneath the grief was something stronger. Freedom. The kind that comes when you stop fighting for a place where you were never meant to stay. They had planned their future together carefully. In doing so, they unknowingly gave me permission to plan mine, and for the first time it was built entirely around me. I thought I would be the one to end it, that I would regain control before the damage spread any further. That belief helped me sleep at night, helped me look at myself in the mirror without flinching. But life has a way of exposing truths before you're ready to face them. I didn't get the chance to choose a clean ending. The truth surfaced in fragments, through tension, through changes in my behavior I hadn't noticed but others had. My son sensed it first. Not the details, not the secret itself, but the shift in me. I was distracted, quieter when I should have been present, defensive when he asked simple questions. One evening he asked me if I was really okay, and for the first time his voice carried doubt instead of reassurance. That broke something in me. I realized then that even if he never knew the full story, he was already paying the price for my choices. The relationship unraveled soon after, not with a dramatic confrontation but with exhaustion. What once felt like comfort began to feel heavy. The stolen moments lost their warmth and turned tense, filled with unspoken fear. We both understood the risk had outgrown the reward. There was no future to argue over, no promises to break, just an unspoken agreement that this couldn't continue. Ending it didn't bring relief. It brought clarity, and clarity hurt more than guilt ever had. When it was over, I was left alone with everything I had avoided. The loneliness returned, but it felt different now. Sharper. Earned. I couldn't pretend I was only a victim of circumstance anymore. I had crossed a line knowing full well where it led. I had taken something meant to comfort me and turned it into a source of shame. That realization forced me to confront myself without excuses. I never told my son the full truth. I couldn't. Some truths don't heal when spoken. They only spread pain further. What I did tell him was that I had made mistakes after the divorce, that I had tried to fill a void the wrong way. He listened quietly, nodded, and told me he just wanted me to be okay. His forgiveness, offered without knowing everything, was harder to accept than anger would have been. The aftermath didn't resolve neatly. Trust in myself took time to rebuild. I had to relearn what healthy connection looked like, what boundaries meant when no one was watching. I stopped seeking validation from attention and started sitting with discomfort instead. It wasn't empowering or inspirational. It was slow and humbling and necessary. What surprised me most was how much that experience changed the way I viewed desire. I no longer saw it as something harmless or fleeting. I understood how easily it can blur judgment when paired with vulnerability. I learned that loneliness doesn't excuse betrayal, even when no vows are being broken. The damage isn't always public. Sometimes it lives quietly inside the people who trusted you most. I don't tell this story to justify what I did. I tell it because I know how easy it is to believe you'd never cross a line until the moment arrives and you step over it willingly. After my divorce, my son wanted to help me, and he did in every way that mattered. What I did afterward wasn't caused by that help, but by my refusal to face myself honestly. Some choices don't ruin your life instantly. They change it slowly, teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn. I carry those lessons with me now, not as punishment, but as a reminder that healing requires responsibility, not escape. And that the most unbelievable part of my story isn't what I did, but how close I came to losing the one thing that was trying to save me all along.